In the winter of 1963, renowned American astronomer Carl Sagan visited a research facility in the Virgin Islands, where scientists were inching their way closer to what may have been a breakthrough discovery. From the outside, John C. Lilly's Communication Research Institute looked just like one more resort that could serve as an amazing vacation destination, complete with a winding staircase leading up to a balcony that overlooked the Caribbean. But on the inside, Lilly's research team was making strides, it seemed, in verbally communicating with dolphins. And while conversing with a dolphin probably seems like a lofty enough goal in its own right, John Lilly believed that bridging the communication gap between intelligent species on Earth could help him fulfill an even loftier goal: helping mankind establish communication with extraterrestrial life. And as you probably already suspect, the whole communicating with life in outer space part was exactly what brought Carl Sagan into the picture. At least in part. Sagan definitely wanted to make an effort toward communicating with anyone or anything that might be out there. But his interest in extraterrestrial life was firmly grounded in optimism, while neurologist John C. Lilly's interest was based more on his own deep-seated convictions. But I digress. Sagan was interested in the challenges of establishing communication with a radically different non-human species, which, if there were ever to be any hope of communicating with life out there in the stars, it's definitely a skill that would be infinitely valuable to master. In Sagan's book, The Cosmic Connection, he recounts his first meeting with a dolphin at Lilly's laboratory named Elvar, who played with Sagan in very much the way you would expect a dolphin to. They splashed one another, and Sagan indulged Elvar in belly rubs. Elvar was all about belly rubs, and after his first rub, he presented his stomach for a second helping of Sagan scratches, and then a third. And here's where the story gets weird. After Elvar's third belly rub, the dolphin reportedly leapt up and vocalized a sound that sounded eerily similar to the word more. Sagan had come to the lab to see Lilly's results, but he hadn't expected anything quite that profound to happen. So, did Elvar the dolphin actually say a word in English, or did it simply sound that way? Sagan told one of Lilly's research assistants about it, and the assistant remarked that Elvar could quote-unquote say far more than just the word more. Reportedly, Elvar is said to have known somewhere around 50 English words and could use them in context. So the question of whether or not dolphins could communicate had been answered. So the next logical question was, just how effectively could dolphins verbally communicate with those around them? And in how much detail? To find that out, Sagan, along with astronomer Frank Drake, had an intriguing suggestion for Lilly. They suggested that he place two dolphins in separate tanks and ensure that the dolphins were near to each other but could not see one another. Then the two astronomers recommended that Lilly teach one of the dolphins a procedure to obtain food, and then see if she could verbally teach the other dolphin how to do the same thing in her own tank. Seems like a pretty good suggestion, right? I would love to tell you that John Lilly took the advice of some of the greatest scientific minds that the world has ever known. But John Lilly had his own agenda. He instead continued with his studies in word recognition and allowed his assistant, Margaret Howe Lovett, to live with a dolphin named Peter for 6 solid days per week in order to become intimately familiar with the nuances of his behavior and communication patterns. Though, unfortunately, she became so intimate with Peter that the story appeared in Hustler magazine in November of 1978. Now, I'm not going to go into the specifics of that here. If you really want to know, I'll let you tarnish your internet search history with that little bit of trivia. Anyway, when Margaret Howe Lovett resolved to perform her live-in study, the walls of Lily's research laboratory, or the Dolphin House as it's so often called, were covered with plaster. The floors were then filled with seawater, and the water was periodically refreshed by incoming tides that came in through openings on either end of the house. It was like an indoor lagoon, if you can imagine such a thing. Margaret worked at a desk that was suspended from the ceiling above the water, and she slept on an elevator platform that served as a makeshift bed. Now, it goes without saying that this research completely destroyed the building and is said to have been fantastically expensive. So, where'd the money come from, you're probably wondering? Well, don't worry, because I'm getting to that. In the summer of 1960, astronomer Frank Drake conducted the first experiment to detect incoming signals from extraterrestrial civilizations using a radio telescope at the Green Bank Observatory in West Virginia. This experiment is widely considered to be the foundation for what would become known as SETI, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. The following year, John Lilly published the book Man and Dolphin, a now famous treatise on the possibility of communicating with animals who possessed what could potentially be complex language and intelligence that exists outside the sphere of human intelligence. And we can only guess that Frank Drake loved it. In November of the same year, Drake invited Lilly to the now famous Green Bank Conference, where Frank Drake first unveiled his famous equation for estimating the number of alien civilizations that could potentially exist in the Milky Way galaxy. What we now call the Drake equation. And it was Lilly's well-connected social circle that helped him secure financial backing from NASA and other U.S. government agencies. But like most stories of forward-thinking people who find fame, Lilly's story quickly devolves into drugs and ruin. At a Hollywood party in the early 1960s, Lilly is said to have met Constance Dowling, who was married to the producer of the 1963 Dolphin movie, Flipper. And Dowling is said to have introduced Lilly to LSD. And while you may think that Lilly's use of LSD was strictly recreational, would you believe that he was licensed by the American government to research the drug and its possible medicinal properties for mental health patients? And here's where our story gets really dark. Well, darker than it has been so far anyway. By 1964, Lilly was injecting dolphins with LSD to see what kind of effects it would have on them. And this is far from the first strike against Lilly when it comes to potential animal cruelty. During the 1950s, his brain-mapping surgical experiments on dolphins had to be done without anesthetic, as dolphins would stop breathing when they were heavily sedated. And satisfying Lilly's scientific curiosity came at the cost of some of the dolphins' lives. Lilly's young assistant, Margaret Howe Lovett, remember her? Our Hustler magazine featurette with the dolphin named Peter? Well, she wanted to protect the animals from harm however she could, and she insisted that Peter be left out of the LSD experiments. But she was powerless to protect the other dolphins from Lilly, as she had no say whatsoever in their treatment. By the fall of 1966, Lilly's interest in LSD had become an all-consuming obsession, completely overshadowing his interest in dolphins. And his disregard for the well-being of his research subjects drove away the director of his lab, and ultimately cost him the federal funding that he depended on for his research. The research facility in the Virgin Islands was decommissioned, and the dolphins were moved to a dark, empty building in Miami, Florida, that had previously been a bank. Margaret Howe Lovett could not accompany the dolphins there, and I'm sure it will come as no surprise to you that she was very worried about Peter's well-being, which was in severe jeopardy. Peter is said to have been kept in a ridiculously small tank, where he saw little to no sunlight. According to veterinarian Andy Williamson, who looked after the dolphins' well-being there, Peter committed suicide. Williamson explained that, quote, "Dolphins are not automatic air breathers like we are. Every breath is a conscious effort. If life becomes too unbearable, the dolphins just take a breath and they sink to the bottom. They don't take the next breath." End quote. Peter was gone, and his time spent on Earth would not be remembered for his participation in Lily's communication experiments, but instead for the seedy Hustler magazine story that had made him famous. Margaret Howe Lovett did her best to track down every copy she could of the Hustler magazine story and destroy it, but her efforts were of no use. The story was out, and her reputation was irreparably tarnished. John Lilly's love affair with LSD had led him to a drug-induced experience that left him with convictions that can only be described as bizarre. In his drug-addled state, he believed that he had made contact with two distinct factions of extraterrestrial life. The first group he called Solid-State Intelligence, or SSI, and he believed that SSI was a malevolent, non-organic, machine-based intelligence that was parasitically growing within human-made computers, and SSI intended to eventually displace all organic life forms on Earth. The second group Lilly called the Earth Coincidence Control Office, or ECHO. Lilly described ECHO as a network of cosmic entities that oversee human affairs through synchronicity and what he called coincidences. He believed that these wise, powerful, and benevolent beings wanted to guide humanity's evolution through specially assigned agents that they had chosen on Earth, and that he himself was, of course, one of those agents. Now, I think it's probably safe to say that an extraterrestrial faction called ECHO isn't protecting mankind with its specially selected Earth agents. But hey, if it is, one of those agents might just be Ed Annunziata, who brought us the Ecco the Dolphin games in the 1990s, whose namesake is, I'm sure, rather obvious at this point. When Ed Annunziata interviewed for the position of project director at Sega, he's said to have pitched his idea for Ecco the Dolphin during his interview, on day one. This was a major ambition of his, and he'd had a lot of time to think about it. Before coming to Sega, he'd mostly made educational games, and Ecco was meant to be, at least in part, a means of teaching his daughter about dolphins and echolocation. And echolocation is pretty profound. In Italian, echo even means I see. But as usual, I digress. Now, it took a little convincing for Ed to get Sega on board for the project, but Ed ultimately won them over. And it's easy to see why. Ecco the Dolphin was revolutionary for a video game hero. Aside from the markings on his forehead meant to mimic the constellation of Delphinus the dolphin, he's a very ordinary dolphin here to save his pod, and also the world from an ancient race of aliens hell-bent on making Earth's oceans into an all-you-can-eat seafood buffet. Now, to be clear, those of us who were young in the 90s had no idea that Ecco was a science fiction epic. We thought it was just a cute dolphin game. Even the famous oceanographer from 1970s television, Jacques Cousteau, made a TV commercial for Ecco the Dolphin. And it seemed like a really kid-friendly game meant to help us while away a summer vacation. So many of us had simply popped in the cartridge, innocently hoping to control a dolphin on screen and have a cool undersea adventure. We had no idea that we were signing up for a Ridley Scott-inspired dark survival horror movie experience filled with carnivorous alien abductions, time travel, and a battle with an alien queen that would put Sigourney Weaver to shame. We battled through two of the most beautiful and punishingly difficult games ever made, only to find that Ecco's story ends on a cliffhanger. And any kid in the 90s who suffered through the frustration and countless underwater deaths and the indignity of constantly keying in passwords for just one more shot at victory, had to celebrate with the most powerful of fist pumps at the reward we were given at the end of Ecco the Dolphin: The Tides of Time. We were given a password for a coming third game. And surely, in the third game, we'd be able to punch in our newly acquired password, and we'd be swimming ahead of everyone who dared to pick up a third cartridge without battling their way through the first two. But unfortunately, the third installment of Ecco never arrived. I mean, there was a third Ecco game on the Sega Dreamcast called Defender of the Future, but it wasn't a follow-up to the series at all. It was just a reboot, and that game doesn't even use passwords. Like the lost city of Atlantis, the hopes and dreams of Ecco the Dolphin fans were reduced to a legend lost in the past. After saving up all of our hard-earned allowance money, begging for Ecco on our birthdays, and using the Sega Genesis to save the world from an alien harvest, twice I might add, we're left with little more than a password that belongs to a game that doesn't exist. But after all these years, it's finally coming. A new Ecco the Dolphin game has officially been announced and will soon be within our reach. But before we bring back the bottlenose badass to take on hungry aliens once again, let's do what Ecco does best. Let's go back in time, explore Ecco's story, and speculate on what lies ahead. Because, as always, Ecco the Dolphin is making all of our futures just a little bit brighter. For those of us who were lucky enough to get the original OG Ecco the Dolphin game back in 1992, we had no idea that we were in for the jump scare of our lives when we popped in the cartridge. You get to play as Ecco, swimming around with your cute little dolphin friends, and communicate with them underwater by using your cool sonar. And then one of your fellow dolphins asks you how high in the sky you can fly. Now ask any child how high they can jump, and you know exactly what the answer will be. It's really high. And they're going to show you. So, being the kids that we were, we got ready to show this mouthy dolphin just how high in the sky we could fly. We're making Ecco jump higher and higher into the air, having a great time, and then... oh my God. All of your dolphin friends, the fish, the coral, and probably the kitchen sink are sucked up into the sky. Was that some kind of tropical storm? Some kind of typhoon? They're all gone. Is it my fault? It feels like my fault somehow. Jesus, I'm so sorry. Children across the world dropped their 3-button controllers and ran away screaming to hide under the covers. Now, when you consider that video games were mostly marketed to boys in the 90s, Ecco probably seemed like an easy sell to young girls. Your brother has a Sega Genesis, he gets some licensed sports game for the holidays, and your parents thought this looked like a cute, potentially appealing game for any young girl who probably already has a Lisa Frank Trapper Keeper that has neon colors and dolphins flying through some kind of hot pink LSD-inspired cosmic landscape, right? Wouldn't a dolphin game be just perfect for you? And then that little girl has to watch helplessly as all of her new pixelated dolphin friends are sucked up into the sky and far out of sight. Well, that'll teach you to try new things, young lady. For all the childhood trauma that this game caused us, this is where Ecco's adventure begins. Life in the seas seems eerily sparse after the bizarre incident that claimed Ecco's pod. So it's time to start searching for answers. And our first piece of useful information comes from an orca who tells you to find a whale called the Big Blue, who's traveling north to die. Yes, to die. If the disappearance of your pod wasn't enough to bring you down already, this whale has made a plan and he's following through with it. Anyway, Big Blue is said to possibly know the whereabouts of your pod, So, how exactly is Ecco meant to find the Big Blue? Just heading north isn't a strategy that's likely to be met with success after all. Well, the Orca tells Ecco to travel through the Undercaves, a deep-sea labyrinth where air pockets are painfully scarce. It's at this point that we should address the atmosphere of Ecco the Dolphin. It's desolate, eerie, and nothing short of haunting. This is especially true if you play the Sega CD version, with the enhanced soundtrack by Spencer Nilsson. Ecco's creator, Ed Annunziata, is said to be a big Pink Floyd fan, and as the story goes, he played Pink Floyd's Shine On You Crazy Diamond in order to show Nilsson the tone and style he was looking for in Ecco's music. And Nilsson really nailed it. The slow, atmospheric drone of the soundtrack really evokes the vast emptiness of the sea. And it adds a feeling of desperation to the game when you're really frantically searching for a place to come up for air, which all too often ends in Ecco letting out the saddest of shrill cries ever heard as he drowns on the screen right before your eyes. The Undercaves are excruciatingly difficult to get through, and making your way through each section of the underwater maze might be doable, except you've got a job to do along the way. You have to help lost dolphins find their way back to the surface, because, they have neither the instinct nor the intellect to figure it out for themselves, apparently. And all this might be fine if Ecco didn't have to contend with the undersea currents that make it extremely hard to get around. But here's where Ecco becomes really interesting. It's a game that allows you to find tools in the environment. Ecco can follow sinking rocks down to overcome strong currents, and when a stone blocks his path, it's always a safe bet that somewhere you can find the strange orbiting sea anemones known as the stone-eating stars to, eat the stones. And the stone-eating stars is one of our first big otherworldly presences in this world. And although I thought it was cool as a kid, I had no idea how much the story would delve into magical realism. While we're on the subject of otherworldly objects here, we have to talk about the huge crystalline glyphs that Ecco can communicate with via sonar. They either give him cryptic messages to serve as thinly veiled clues, or just inconsiderately block his way until he does a series of tasks. And nothing is more heartbreaking in this game than happening upon a glyph that won't move. That means you've already missed communicating with another glyph that would have acted as a key to allow you to progress. And since there are so few opportunities to come up for air, it's a safe bet that you're going to drown. And then you'll have to start the Undercaves over again, and again, and again, for what's probably the 10th or 11th time now. And you better hope that you don't lose any stone-eating stars along your way either, because then you're really in trouble. You can push them along with your sonar, but if you take too long, they vanish. And if you don't move them with expert precision, they'll move somewhere out of reach, and you'll have to go back to where you found them and try again once they've reappeared. Oh, and did you remember to find an air pocket somewhere first? Is there even one available? Time to start over. As frustrating as this all is, there are few things in life that are as satisfying as completing the Undercaves. Seriously. Candy stripe a hospital, volunteer at a soup kitchen, undercover some ancient Saxon horde with your metal detector on a remote stretch of land somewhere. It all pales in comparison, really. But even that doesn't hold a candle to what's ahead. The shark-infested waters of the Arctic. After navigating our way through the labyrinth that apparently exists beneath the ice floes in the Arctic, which is also apparently infested with sharks and giant dolphin-attacking crabs, Ecco finally finds the great whale called Big Blue, who, as we know, is not long for this world. Now, you'd think that in this very dour story, the Big Blue would have something good to say. Surely he'll be our Obi-Wan Kenobi, our fairy godmother. But no, Big Blue simply explains that every 500 years, a devastating storm comes to steal away his pod, and that he's helpless to stop it. The only one who can help, he says, is the asteroid. a primordial being that looks like a giant DNA helix slowly spinning in the icy depths of the ocean inside of a dark cave. Thankfully, when we do find the asteroid, it recognizes Ecco and strangely even says that it remembers him. This seems to be our first potential ally in this story, with something truly useful to offer. The asteroid sends Ecco to the uninhabited sunken ruins of Atlantis to find a time machine. Now, I'm not entirely sure how the machine works, since it doesn't seem to have any means of inputting a destination, but hey, it's ancient and mystical, so just roll with it. Ecco is instructed to use the time machine to travel 55 million years into the past, and there, find the missing pieces of the asteroid. Oh, what's that? Couldn't you tell by looking that the helix was incomplete? Do helixes just look all the same to you? You racist. Ecco has to retrieve 2 orbs that were once part of the spinning asteroid helix. Only when the asteroid is whole again will it be able to give Ecco the superpowers he needs to defeat the storm that the Big Blue spoke of. And who can say no to superpowers? In Atlantis, Ecco finds a series of glyphs that give us a glimpse of Atlantean knowledge. And it's here that Ecco learns of the Vortex, an extraterrestrial race that returns every 500 years to feed upon the Earth. Now, in 1992, no one was expecting any of this from a game with a dolphin on the cover. And whether or not you approve of the hidden science fiction epic you've been thrown into, you've come too far to quit now. We find the machine, which looks eerily like 2 satellite dishes facing one another, and swimming between them initiates a time warp. Because as we all know, that's what combining 2 satellite dishes inevitably does. We travel 55 million years into the past, naturally, where Ecco is ferried from one body of water to the next by a giant pterodon. And yes, that is the sound of a pterodon. Don't give me that look. You don't know. You don't know. Obviously, this is entirely the wrong period in history for a flying reptile, but we'll forgive the inconsistency, because, as I said before, we've come much too far to turn back now. After battling through the trilobites and hungry prehistoric denizens of the deep, we finally come upon the asteroid, who unexpectedly attacks us in this timeline. Ecco steals away 2 globes from the asteroid helix of the past, and then we're instantaneously transported back to the present to give them to the asteroid of the present timeline. Now, the first time I saw this, it confused me. How could Ecco be transported back to the present without a time machine? That's not the kind of time travel mechanics we're used to seeing in movies, after all. It turns out that in this story, time travel is not a one-way trip. With the Atlantean time machine, you can travel to the past, and only the past, to fulfill a task. And once that task is complete, you will return to either your own timeline or maybe even an earlier point in time than you expect. And if the task you've traveled through time to fulfill requires retrieving something, like part of a huge spinning helix that lives under the ocean, you can bring that back with you. So time travelers can be tourists, but never permanent residents in this story. They can get souvenirs to take home, but it seems that they can never stick around for too long. It's definitely a strange take on time travel mechanics, and it raises some interesting questions about determinism. Was Ecco predestined to time travel and restore the asteroid's missing pieces? Did Echo somehow prevent the asteroid from being robbed of its components by stealing them in the past before that could even happen? Were those missing pieces meant to be devoured by the vortex at some point in the past? And by changing the past, what else have we unintentionally altered in the present? And for that matter, if we can time travel, why not just go back to the past and prevent all this insanity from happening in the first place? Well, actually, we can do that. Surprisingly, after the asteroid's missing pieces are restored, Echo is transported through time once again. Because I guess on the time machine's GPS he added multiple stops or something. I'm not sure. But Echo is transported back in time to the moment that kicked off our story, when the vortex were harvesting the Earth. And here, Echo was sucked up into the sky, into the vortex's vortex. Now, since no other sea life that we know of has ever come back from this one-way trip to hell, you'd think that this course of action would be ill-advised. But if you remember, we've held up our end of the deal with the asteroid, and it's given Echo some significant superpowers. He no longer needs air to breathe, and his sonar can now be weaponized against his opponents. And he's going to need all the help he can get. Because after Echo is lifted up into the sky, it's here that we have to endure what may be the most punishingly difficult level in video game history. Welcome to the machine. Obviously, Welcome to the Machine is an homage to the Pink Floyd song of the same name from the 1975 album Wish You Were Here. And during this horrific level, you'll wish anyone was here to help while you're swimming through the industrial hellscape that is the Vortex's ship. Navigating your way through this means surviving a 7-minute-long auto-scrolling maze. And Echo is constantly accosted by hungry Vortex drones, who look eerily similar to H.R. Giger's xenomorph designs from the Alien movies. But instead of having humanoid legs, the Vortex are more like crustaceans, with spinal columns that descend into what look like a shrimp's tail. Now, when it comes to alien designs, the Vortex are by far one of the creepiest I've ever seen, with their green pallor, black eyes, and disturbing fangs that protrude upward from their odd underbite. But I digress. This game literally turns into a space shooter, as Echo's sonar can now make the Vortex's bodies fly apart. It's only after battling your way through the machine that Echo can finally face off with the Vortex Queen. Or at least her unbelievably enormous head, anyway. It's massive, and it extends beyond the borders of the screen. All Echo has to do is dislodge her jaw a few times, and evade the toxic acid that she sprays into the... what are we swimming in exactly here? Are we in a zero-gravity atmosphere? Is this water we're swimming through? I'm not sure. But dislodging the Queen's jaw is easier said than done. It means getting dangerously close to her mouth, and that puts Echo at risk of getting eaten. And if he does, you've got to go through the machine all over again. Don't worry, it'll only take you about half a dozen times or so to make it through the machine and finally finish the game. And seeing Echo's pod in a flying V formation as they escape the machine is pretty awesome. Now, if you made it through this game without tearing your hair out, you're officially amazing. And I hope you played the Sega CD version. It has checkpoints that make the entire game much more palatable. Not to mention the awesome Red Book audio score by Spencer Nielsen. The cartridge version, I think, may be the only legalized form of child abuse that I'm aware of. But anyway, as awesome as it is to finally beat the game and finally see Echo swimming with his pod once again, we know that it's not all over. You know that Vortex Queen is gonna get hungry again, and you know she's gonna seek some retribution. So Echo is gonna have to venture into Atlantis once more, in the sequel, The Tides of Time. Now, if you played through the Sega CD version of Ecco the Dolphin, you'll remember the bonus areas with the cool sunken ship. It has a very 17th century European aesthetic, so I think we naturally all assumed it would be a pirate ship, or some equally fun kind of aquarium swag. But I digress. Those of us who played the cartridge versions didn't see this ship until the Tides of Time. And it's significant because it's the first sign we see of human life in this world. According to legend, Sega of America had actually requested that divers be present as enemies in the first game, but Annunziata refused. Ecco's world is completely devoid of human life, which is precisely what makes it feel so isolating to us. Some people have claimed that the game gave them thalassophobia, or fear of the ocean, because it really is a dark, desolate abyss. But, I mean, real-world accuracy aside, it would have to be a desolate abyss after an alien harvest. It's a post-apocalyptic world, which is scary in its own right. But add to that a fear of the deep, and it takes the atmosphere to a whole other level. But hey, this is the sequel now, The Tides of Time. Everybody's happy, the vortex are gone. What could go wrong? Well, the Star Wars-inspired opening crawl of the game tells us that the Vortex Queen isn't quite as gone as we would have hoped. She's followed Ecco back to Earth, where she's starting a new hive of drones who lie in wait to exact her revenge. Now, telling the story of Tides of Time is not quite as easy as it is for the first game. It's far more abstract, and it raises far more questions than it answers. But Novo Trade Software definitely knew what they were doing when they put this together. It's gorgeous, and it stands as one of the best-looking 16-bit games there is. And between the cartridge version and the CD version, it's really hard to recommend one over the other, because the music is great in both, and the CD adds some CG cutscenes. Whichever one you ultimately choose, what's most interesting in both versions is the introduction of a 3D minigame. This game gives us super-scaling 3D stages, in which Ecco can travel off to far-off waters through gates left for him by the Atlanteans. And these circular gates were obviously inspired by Stargate. But I digress. Instead of our story kicking off with an alien abduction, this time it begins with an earthquake. Our hero, of course, is in an underwater cave when the rocks overhead begin to rain down on him. And just as he makes his way to safety, he's met with a harbinger of bad news. A dolphin approaches to warn him that he has lost the powers that the asteroid gave him, and now he will have to surface for air. And the newcomer's bad news doesn't end there. This dolphin also tells Ecco the reason for his lost abilities. The asteroid is dead. We have felt it, the dolphin explains. Jedi style, presumably. And just as Ecco is probably beginning to think that he's had all the bad news he can handle for one day, the newcomer dolphin tells him that they also have felt something else. The presence of the vortex. This is a lot of heavy stuff for one day, but we're not done there. Suddenly, a dolphin with incredibly long fins appears and tells Ecco that she is Trelia, his descendant, and she's here to take Ecco to, you guessed it, the future. Now, one would expect that Ecco and his descendants would need to go to Atlantis to travel through time, but presumably Trelia used the time machine to get here. So, if you remember, time travel is never one way in this story. So, Ecco and Trelia arrive in what can only be called a time warp of sorts. Which begs the question, if Trelia can travel through time, why is she visiting Ecco now? Why not before the asteroid died? And for that matter, why not before the vortex attacked? I'm sure it all has to do with determinism and complicated temporal stuff that would all make a great movie script, but we don't have time to think about any of that now, because we suddenly time warp into the future. where there's new sea life. And more importantly, there's flying dolphins, who can also help Ecco fly above the water with the power of their minds, I guess. And here we're also introduced to the sky tides, a series of tube-like waterways that are, you guessed it, in the sky. So now Ecco has to traverse the sky tides in order to find the asteroid. Now, how is the asteroid alive in this future if it's already dead in the past? Was that other dolphin lying? And why do we need to use the sky tides when other dolphins seem to get around just fine with telekinetic flight? Look, there's no time for reasonable questions here. We've got dolphin stuff to do. So as into the sky we go. Traversing the sky tides means getting past a giant jellyfish-like creature called Medusa, who's more than just a little bit territorial. If you can't outrun her, she'll throw you right back down where you came from. 2 whole levels back, and you'll have to swim your way back. And making your way past her isn't easy. The sky tides are full of sinkholes that will pull you out of the sky. You know, if Trelia could have brought you back just a little closer to the asteroid, or maybe even helped us fly here, this could all have been easily avoided. And just to add insult to injury, we also need to talk about the metaspheres, which are these strange bubbles in the future that allow Ecco to change into other life forms. And, you know, it's cool to change into other creatures in the game. Ecco gets to turn into a shark, a vortex drone, a school of fish, a smack of jellyfish. And yes, a group of jellyfish is called a smack. Don't give me that look. Go Google it if you like. Anyway, Ecco can even turn into a seagull. You know, a seagull, those animals that can fly through the sky and don't have to depend on magical flying tubes filled with water. Yeah, you know, changing into a seagull really would have been handy before we had to deal with Medusa. But no, we didn't get to transform into a seagull for that. It just would have made far too much sense. Anyway, Ecco manages to make his way across the sky tides and back into the depths of the sea to find the asteroid, who thankfully is at least happy to see him after all this. "Hello, my little singer," it says cheerfully. Now, I hate to sound cynical here, but anytime anyone greets you that cheerfully, you just know that they want something. Which, of course, the asteroid totally does. Never trust a giant spinning DNA helix, I always say. But I digress. Here, the asteroid speaks a little cryptically, and it tells Ecco that he is the stone that has split the stream of time in 2. So, long story short, there are multiple timelines at stake here, and this current future that Ecco happens to be in won't exist much longer, unless Ecco returns to his own time and stops the vortex, and also saves the asteroid's life. Now, if you feel confused right now, you're not alone. There are some problems we need to address here. 3 to be exact. Number 1, we've all seen Back to the Future. We know that time traveling forward in time from a bad present means arriving in a bad future. So how did we get here from a past where the asteroid is dead, or at least maybe dying? Is this an alternate future from an alternate timeline? And by virtue of having traveled through time, is Ecco now somehow predestined to save the asteroid? Number 2, why did Ecco need to come here at all? Couldn't Trelia have just told us all of this and saved us a trip? And number 3, if Trelia can time travel, why didn't she just go back early enough to warn the asteroid of its untimely demise? Obviously, I don't know the answers to any of these questions, and Ecco doesn't get to stick around and find out, because time travel is always temporary in this world. So Ecco is transported back to his present. A present in which a new batch of vortex have hatched and are now roaming the seas. Turns out, the arrival of the vortex is what caused the earthquake that happened before Trelia showed up and gave Ecco all of these pointless errands to run. But there's no time to think about any of that. Ecco is home now, and there's a mess to clean up. So, Ecco does some of his usual heroics and finds an orca's missing children for her, which thankfully have not been eaten by the vortex. And after Ecco heroically finds them all, the mother orca tells Ecco to listen to her memory. We're then treated to a fever dream of the Vortex Queen, who is still missing the jaw that Ecco dislodged from her face during their showdown. And as you might expect, she is pissed. She knows that the asteroid gave Ecco his powers, and she deploys her drones to steal the asteroid's orbs and scatter them throughout the sea. So I hope you enjoyed your last fetch quest, because it's time for another one. You are now tasked with rebuilding the asteroid. Now, rebuilding the asteroid is not as tedious as it sounds, because retrieving the orbs is pretty cool, honestly. Each pair that you find takes up orbit around Ecco as he carries them back to the asteroid's lair. Ecco even gets some help along the way from a massive blue whale who breaks through some rocks obstructing Ecco's path. As we slowly rebuild the asteroid, it's able to communicate more and more. And just as it looks as though Ecco is about to finish piecing the asteroid back together, we find out that he's 2 orbs short. But since the asteroid is at least mostly put back together now, it can tell us where they are. They've been taken into a dark future in which the vortex rule the Earth. Now look, I know what you're thinking. If the time machine only goes into the past, how could someone use it to take the last 2 pieces of the asteroid into the future? Well, that's because the time travelers who used it were from the future. The vortex from the dark future used, or rather will use, the time machine to travel back to this time and spirit away the last 2 pieces of the asteroid. And since the Atlantean time machine can only take Ecco into the past, the path into the future is closed to us. But Ecco has other problems to deal with now. A new batch of vortex drones are on the loose. So Ecco returns to his home base of Lunar Bay, which has suddenly become overrun by the vortex. And the vortex seem to be terraforming the waters to suit their needs. There's bizarre serpentine creatures swimming around and odd plant life. It's nothing short of disturbing. And it's here that Ecco was grabbed by 2 vortex drones. And these drones are different than the others that are infesting Lunar Bay. Instead of the strange crustacean appearance we're used to seeing, these 2 seem to have legs. These 2 drones are time travelers from the future, where the vortex have evolved, apparently. And with Ecco in hand, the 2 vortex drones suddenly time warp into the dark future and spirit Ecco away with them. After Ecco and his captors arrive in the future, we find ourselves in a series of water-filled tubes high in the clouds, where the 2 drones gruesomely just fly apart. Why? I have no idea. Some fans have suggested that the dramatic change in pressure as they left the sea and then arrived in the stratosphere was just too much for their bodies to take. While Ecco is somehow able to withstand it since he has at least a little of the powers that the partially rebuilt asteroid has given him. Or maybe it's just a time travel thing and these 2 have somehow unwittingly erased themselves from existence. Your guess is as good as mine. But whatever has just happened, Ecco finds himself alone in the dark future, filled with industrial metal and glass tubing that extends high into the stratosphere. And it's here that Ecco must navigate another maze of tubes in the sky in order to find a strange organism called the globe holder who resembles some kind of egg or cocoon. And after Ecco retrieves the final 2 pieces from the globe holder, he's transported back to his present, along with the final 2 pieces of the asteroid. Now, since we know that time travelers always warp back to their own timeline in this story, why did the vortex bring Ecco to the future at all? Wouldn't it have been easier just to kill him? But there's no time for reasonable questions. The yo-yo mechanics of time travel are in full swing, and Ecco is back in Lunar Bay, where apparently the asteroid has recruited all of the dolphins to join forces and fight the vortex, which is really cool to see on screen. The asteroid's final pieces are restored, and Ecco is at full power once again. Weaponized sonar, and no more need to surface for air. So, it's off to fight alongside your fellow dolphins as you make your way to the vortex's new machine, where there's a new auto-scrolling level that we have to pass before our final battle with the Queen, who looks absolutely nothing like she did in the last game, or even earlier in this one for that matter. She honestly looks like a giant version of the chestbuster from Alien, which, originality notwithstanding, is pretty terrifying. The metal piping and the walls of the machine move when she emerges, seemingly expanding and contracting as though it's breathing, while the Queen spits some kind of horrible extraterrestrial acid at you. But you've been through all this before with Ecco. And after your 10th or 11th attempt at trying to defeat the Queen, you'll get the pattern down and send her packing. Now, you know how these games end. When Ecco destroys the Queen with his super sonar, he returns to his pod, and everyone sings his praises. And in this game, you get to do some SeaWorld-worthy acrobatics with your fellow dolphins in formation behind you, in perfect synchronization, which is really cool to see. But unlike the first game, there is an epilogue to Tides of Time. Ecco returns to the asteroid, who goes all Doc Brown on him and says that the time machine must be destroyed. So Ecco returns to Atlantis, but unexpectedly we find a really creepy giant swimming organism waiting there for him. This bizarre series of interconnected orbs is the vortex's larva, which has survived the ordeal. And despite being larva, it's also making its way to the time machine, as larva tends to do. It's a race to the time machine, and unfortunately, the larva wins. It uses the time machine to venture back into the prehistoric era, where it's not really able to conquer the Earth the way it plans. Instead, it integrates into the Earth's ecosystem and evolves into anthropods. Modern-day creepy crawlies like millipedes and spiders. So now you don't have to feel guilty about stepping on those, because they're all just carnivorous aliens anyway. Ecco now finally has the opportunity to destroy the time machine. But instead, he uses it to travel to an unknown timeline. Or, as the game says, he disappears into the tides of time. And it's here where we're given a password for a third Ecco game. And we knew the next game was coming. But we've waited for 32 years. And as they say, good things come to those who wait, because Ecco 3 is finally coming. Whenever Ecco 3 finally arrives, it's said to be part of a planned release called Ecco Complete, which will be a compilation of all 3 games, remastered for modern platforms. Remasters aren't really for me, so I'm really hoping that there'll be a Genesis version of Ecco 3, though I know that's highly unlikely. But hey, Ecco is coming back. What will we see in this next game? Will we finally see the Atlanteans? Are they human? Are they some kind of primordial life akin to the asteroid? Have the vortex somehow altered history in some way that we can't predict? When Ecco returns to his timeline, will it be the same timeline that he left behind? But all questions aside, our hero is coming back. And I don't know about you, but for me, it feels like we need a hero more than ever these days. And Echo has saved the world twice already, so we can only hope that the third time will be a charm. Thanks for listening, and if you liked the show, please feel free to say hi on Blue Sky or drop me a line at missingmediablues@gmail.com. Until next time, bye.